The chill of an October night wrapped around Sergeant Patrick Coleman as he drove through the quiet streets of Albany, New York. His patrol car's headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating rows of closed shops and empty sidewalks. After 15 years on the force, these night shifts had become as familiar as breathing, each street corner holding memories of countless patrols. Tonight, however, something felt different. A peculiar unease had settled in his stomach, the kind of feeling that veteran officers learn never to ignore. As he approached the old animal shelter on Mason Street, his trained eyes caught movement in the shadows. Near the shelter's rusted gates, a figure stood motionless, barely visible under the dim streetlight. Patrick slowed his vehicle, years of experience kicking in as he assessed the situation. The figure was too low to be human. As he drew closer, his headlights revealed a German shepherd, its coat matted and unkempt, standing with an unusual stillness that spoke of exhaustion rather than threat. Something about the dog's posture struck him as familiar. Patrick had worked with K9 units long enough to recognize a trained stance, even in a dog that clearly hadn't been cared for in months. He pulled over, his instincts telling him this wasn't just another stray. The moment he stepped out of his car, the dog's eyes locked onto his. Patrick froze. In those eyes, he saw something that shook him to his core: recognition. Not the general friendliness some dogs show to humans, but a deep, personal recognition that sent his mind spinning back 3 years. "It can't be," he whispered, approaching slowly. The dog didn't move, maintaining eye contact with an intensity that made Patrick's heart race. As he drew closer, he noticed the worn leather collar around the dog's neck. His hands trembling slightly, he reached out to examine the metal tag hanging from it. The rust-covered tag required several attempts to clean, but when he finally made out the engraving, Patrick's world tilted on its axis. Property of Patrick Coleman, the words he had personally had engraved on his K9 partner's collar 3 years ago. Max? His voice cracked as he spoke the name he hadn't uttered in years. The dog's tail gave a weak wag, and in that simple gesture, any doubt vanished. This was Max, his partner, his friend, the dog he had lost during that disastrous warehouse operation 3 years ago. Memories flooded back, the chaos, the confusion, the desperate search afterward. They had told him Max couldn't have survived, that he needed to accept the loss and move on. Yet here he was, standing before him like a ghost made flesh. Max's condition told a story of hardship, his ribs visible beneath his coat, scars marking his once pristine fur, and a slight favor to his left hind leg. But his eyes, those intelligent eyes that had always seemed to understand more than a dog should, remained unchanged. Patrick knelt beside his old partner, gently running his hands over the dog's head and neck, checking for injuries. Max leaned into his touch, a low whine escaping his throat. "It's okay, boy," Patrick whispered, his police training warring with the emotion threatening to overwhelm him. "I've got you now." As he helped Max into his patrol car, Patrick's mind raced with questions. Where had Max been all this time? How had he survived? And why had he appeared now, at this specific location? The old animal shelter had been closed for months, its windows boarded up and its kennels empty, or so he had believed. Looking at Max through the rearview mirror, Patrick noticed how the dog's attention remained fixed on the shelter, his ears pricked forward in alert concentration. In all their years together, Patrick had learned to trust Max's instincts. Something about that abandoned building had drawn him here, and Patrick intended to find out what. What he didn't realize then was that Max's miraculous return would lead him down a path that would challenge everything he thought he knew about his quiet corner of Albany. As he drove home with his long-lost partner, the empty shelter loomed in his mirrors, its darkened windows holding secrets that would soon begin to unravel. If this story caught your attention, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give it a like. Tell us which city you're watching from. Let's continue. The morning sun cast long shadows across Patrick's living room as he watched Max sleep in his hastily assembled bed. The dog's rest was fitful, punctuated by occasional whimpers and twitching legs that spoke of dreams or nightmares. Patrick had barely slept himself, his mind racing with questions about his partner's mysterious reappearance. After calling in sick for the first time in 5 years, Patrick began his own investigation. The collar around Max's neck held more secrets than just the identification tag. On its inner surface, barely visible unless you knew where to look, was a series of numbers scratched into the metal, 47-23-91AB. They seemed deliberate, not random scratches from wear and tear. Patrick photographed the numbers and sent them to Sarah Monroe, a data analyst at the department who owed him a favor. "Need this checked against any shipping codes or coordinates," he texted. "Off the books." Sarah's response was quick, "Give me 48 hours. And Patrick? Be careful with this one." The warning gave him pause. Sarah wasn't one for melodrama. If she sensed something wrong, there usually was. But Patrick couldn't stop now. He grabbed his laptop and began researching the New Hope Foundation, the organization that had run the abandoned shelter where he'd found Max. On the surface, everything looked legitimate. The foundation's website showcased happy adoption stories and charitable initiatives. But as Patrick dug deeper, troubling patterns emerged. Financial reports showed large donations from unnamed sources. The foundation had expanded rapidly over the past 3 years, opening facilities in 3 different states. Yet despite their apparent success, they had abruptly closed their Albany location 6 months ago. A knock at his door made both Patrick and Max snap to attention. The German Shepherd's reaction was striking. He moved silently to a defensive position, eyes fixed on the entrance. This wasn't standard K9 training behavior. This was something learned from experience. The visitor was James Garner, the shelter's former caretaker. Patrick had left several messages at his listed number, not really expecting a response. Garner was a thin man with nervous eyes that darted around constantly, never quite meeting Patrick's gaze. "I heard you found one of our old residents," Garner said, stepping into the living room. His reaction to seeing Max was odd, a flash of recognition quickly masked by forced casualness. "We get strays dropping by the old building sometimes. Habit, I guess." "This dog was never your resident," Patrick replied calmly, watching Garner's face. "He's my former K9 partner, lost 3 years ago during a police operation." "Want to explain how he ended up at your shelter?" Garner's demeanor shifted subtly. 3 years is a long time, officer. Dogs get picked up, moved around. Papers get lost. You know how it is." He pulled out a business card. "If you want to file a formal inquiry, you can contact our main office in Syracuse." As Garner turned to leave, Max let out a low growl, not aggressive, but clearly distressed. The sound made Garner freeze for just a moment, his hand tightening on his car keys. "Keep him safe," he said quietly, without turning around. "Some lost things should stay lost." The cryptic warning hung in the air long after Garner left. Patrick sat down beside Max, scratching behind his ears the way he used to after long shifts together. The dog leaned into his touch, but his body remained tense, alert. Looking into his partner's eyes, Patrick made a decision. He pulled out his phone and called Emily Bennett, a junior employee he'd interviewed when the shelter first closed. She'd seemed troubled by something then, hiding behind careful answers and policy quotes. "Meet me at Carson's Diner in an hour," she said after he explained about finding Max. "What I have to tell you, it's bigger than just one dog. But I need your word that you'll protect me if I talk." Patrick looked at Max, remembering all the times his partner had had his back in the field. Whatever they were about to uncover, they would face it together. "You have my word," he promised, already reaching for his car keys. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to come together, but Patrick had a feeling he wouldn't like the picture they revealed. Carson's Diner sat on the outskirts of Albany, its neon sign flickering weakly against the afternoon sky. Patrick chose a booth with a clear view of both exits, an old habit from his years on the force. Max lay quietly under the table, but his ears remained alert, tracking every movement in the nearly empty restaurant. Emily Bennett arrived exactly on time, her hands clutching a worn leather messenger bag. She was younger than Patrick remembered, probably in her mid-20s, with the weary look of someone carrying a heavy burden. As she slid into the booth, her eyes darted nervously between Patrick and Max. "I almost didn't come," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "But when you mentioned finding Max, I knew it was time." She pulled a thick manila envelope from her bag. "I've been keeping records. Things that didn't add up at the shelter. The official paperwork said we were operating at capacity, but our kennels were half empty most nights." Patrick leafed through the documents, intake forms, transfer records, financial statements. Many bore the signature of Andrew Carter, the foundation's director. "These numbers don't match the public reports," he noted, years of investigative experience kicking in. "That's just the beginning," Emily continued, her fingers nervously tracing patterns on the tabletop. "Dogs would arrive in the middle of the night. Purebreds, former service animals, police dogs, all with perfect training. They'd disappear within days, listed as adopted to families that don't exist." Max's ears suddenly pricked up, his attention focused on something outside. Moments later, a white van with tinted windows pulled into the parking lot. Emily's face drained of color. "We need to leave. Now." She shoved the envelope into her bag, her hands shaking. "That van," Patrick said, recognition dawning. "I've seen it before, parked behind the shelter." But Emily was already heading for the back exit, leaving money for her untouched coffee. Patrick followed, Max moving silently beside him. Back at his apartment, Patrick spread Emily's documents across his kitchen table. A pattern began to emerge, regular payments from a company called Schenectady Transport Solutions, always coinciding with the disappearance of specific dogs. The same company name appeared on shipping manifests, transporting live cargo to various locations across state lines. Sarah's response about the numbers from Max's collar arrived. 47-23-91AB matches a shipping container code. Registered to Schenectady Transport Solutions. Container was logged at Albany Port 3 years ago, destination undisclosed. "Patrick, these people have connections. High up." As if confirming Sarah's warning, Patrick's phone rang. The caller ID showed his precinct's number, but the voice belonged to Captain Richards, head of internal affairs. "Coleman, there's been a complaint about your recent activities. Harassment of New Hope Foundation employees. You're to cease all unofficial investigations immediately." Patrick's grip tightened on the phone. In 15 years, he'd never received such a call. "With all due respect, sir, I'm looking into the disappearance of police property. My K-9 partner." "That case was closed 3 years ago," Richards replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Don't make me put this in writing, Coleman." After hanging up, Patrick sat in silence, absently stroking Max's head. The dog looked up at him with those knowing eyes, and suddenly Patrick remembered something from the night of Max's disappearance. Before losing track of his partner in the chaos, he'd seen Max alerting to something in the warehouse's back office, the same alert signal he used for detecting contraband. Patrick pulled up the old case files on his laptop. The warehouse had belonged to a shipping company that went bankrupt shortly after the incident. Its assets had been acquired by none other than Schenectady Transport Solutions. A new message from Emily popped up on his phone, found something in Carter's old office. Files on every dog that came through the shelter. Including Max meeting tonight was a mistake. They're watching. Need somewhere safe. Before Patrick could respond, Max suddenly stood at attention, his body rigid. A security light flashed on in the backyard, and through the kitchen window, Patrick caught a glimpse of movement in the shadows. Someone was out there, watching his house. Patrick's instincts kicked in immediately. He silently motioned Max to stay low and moved away from the window. Years of police training had taught him to trust his partner's senses, and right now, Max's behavior confirmed his suspicions. They weren't alone. He sent a quick text to Emily, "Stay where you are. Don't trust phone calls or texts unless we establish a code first." Then he deleted their previous conversation. Whatever was happening, he needed to keep Emily's involvement hidden. She was risking everything by helping him. As dawn approached, Patrick and Max made their way to an old storage facility on the outskirts of town. Unit 23B belonged to his friend Mike, a retired K-9 handler who had passed away last year. The key had been part of Mike's final gifts to Patrick, along with the words, "Sometimes we need a place to think clearly." Inside the unit, Patrick found what he needed, an old police scanner and case files Mike had kept from his active days. Among them was a thick folder labeled ST Investigations, 2020 to 2021. Inside, Mike had compiled information about several shipping companies, including Schenectady Transport Solutions. Patrick's hands trembled as he read through Mike's notes. 3 years ago, his old friend had been investigating a pattern of suspicious activities at Albany's port. Regular shipments, always at night, always with the same personnel. Mike had noted specific container numbers, and one of them matched the code on Max's collar. A dusty laptop sat in the corner of the unit. When Patrick powered it up, he found encrypted files that Mike had never mentioned. The password prompt stared at him mockingly until he remembered Mike's favorite saying, "Trust the dog." The files opened immediately. What he discovered made his blood run cold. Mike had uncovered a sophisticated network operating through seemingly legitimate businesses. The New Hope Foundation was just one piece of a larger puzzle. They weren't just trafficking dogs, they were part of an international operation targeting specific breeds and specially trained animals. Max whined softly, pressing against Patrick's leg. The sound brought back memories of their training days, when Max would alert him to hidden evidence. Following his partner's lead, Patrick examined the area of the storage unit that had caught the dog's attention. Behind a stack of old boxes, he found a hidden compartment containing a single USB drive and a handwritten note. "For Patrick, if you're reading this, you've probably found something they want to keep buried. What happened to your partner wasn't an accident. Follow the money through Helvetica Holdings." Patrick plugged the USB drive into the laptop. It contained financial records showing massive transfers between Helvetica Holdings and various shell companies, including the New Hope Foundation. The transactions coincided with dates of dog disappearances from multiple states. A new email arrived from Sarah, traced the van from Carson's Diner. Registered to a subsidiary of Helvetica Holdings. Pattern matches vehicles spotted at other shelter locations before dogs vanished. There's more, facial recognition hid on your shelter manager, James Garner. Not his real name. The pieces were falling into place, but they painted a picture more complex and disturbing than Patrick had imagined. This wasn't just about Max or the other missing dogs. They had stumbled onto something much bigger, a network so powerful it could influence police investigations and make evidence disappear. Max suddenly tensed, his attention fixed on the storage unit's entrance. Patrick heard it too, the subtle sound of footsteps approaching. Through the small gap under the door, he could see shadows moving. Someone had followed them. Patrick's heart raced as he quickly gathered Mike's files and the USB drive. Max remained focused on the door, his body tense but silent, his police training still evident after all these years. They needed an exit strategy, and fast. The storage unit had a small window near the ceiling, designed for ventilation. Patrick had noticed it earlier but hadn't given it much thought. Now it might be their only option. As the footsteps drew closer, he quickly moved some boxes to create a makeshift platform. Just then, his phone vibrated, a message from Emily, "Carter's gone. Office emptied overnight. But I got something. Hidden safe behind painting. Documents about Project Guardian. They were searching for specific dogs. Military trained. Police K9s." Max wasn't random. The information hit Patrick like a thunderbolt. Max's disappearance hadn't been a coincidence, he'd been targeted. The warehouse operation 3 years ago, the fire that separated them, all of it had been orchestrated. But why? What made these specific dogs so valuable? The answer came from an unexpected source. Sarah sent another encrypted message, "Found connection. Helvetica Holdings linked to private military contractors. They're training dogs for overseas operations." These animals aren't pets, they're assets. Worth millions to the right buyers. The sound of keys jingling outside the storage unit spurred Patrick into action. He helping Max through the window first, then squeezed through himself, clutching Mike's files. They emerged into a narrow alley behind the storage facility just as voices became audible from inside. Patrick and Max made their way through the maze of storage units, staying in the shadows. His mind raced, processing everything they'd discovered. The New Hope Foundation, the fake adoptions, the mysterious shipping containers, it was all a front for something much larger. When they reached his car, Patrick found a manila envelope on the windshield. Inside was a single photograph showing Andrew Carter shaking hands with a man Patrick recognized immediately, Deputy Commissioner Wilson, his department's second-in-command. The image was dated 2 days before the warehouse incident that separated him from Max. A new text arrived from Emily, found records of Wilson's involvement. Regular payments from Helvetica. He authorized police support for their security training program. Hundreds of dogs processed through Albany. They're planning something big. New facility under construction in Syracuse. Patrick started the car, his decision made. They had enough evidence now to expose the entire operation. The corruption reached high into the police department, but there were still people he trusted. Sarah had connections with federal investigators. Emily had the internal documents. Together, they could bring it all to light. Max sat alert in the passenger seat, his eyes scanning their surroundings. The dog that had found his way back to Patrick after 3 years wasn't just a survivor, he was living proof of a conspiracy that had ruined countless lives, human and canine alike. Patrick's phone rang. The caller ID showed Sarah's number. Her voice was urgent, they're moving everything to Syracuse tonight. Emily found shipping orders. If we don't stop this now, all the evidence disappears. I have a contact at the FBI, but we need to move fast. As they drove toward the precinct, Patrick noticed Max's behavior change. The German Shepherd's attention was fixed on something ahead. Following his partner's gaze, Patrick saw a line of white vans leaving the industrial district, the same type of van they'd seen at Carson's diner. Patrick followed the convoy of white vans at a safe distance, Max's presence beside him a reminder of everything at stake. The vehicles led them to Albany's industrial port, where a cargo ship waited in the pre-dawn darkness. Security guards patrolled the perimeter, but their movements seemed rehearsed, mechanical. They were expecting a quiet night. Sarah and Emily were already in position, having arrived separately following Patrick's careful instructions. From their vantage point, they could document everything. Emily's phone continuously uploaded video to secure servers, while Sarah maintained contact with her FBI connection. Through his binoculars, Patrick watched as workers began transferring cages from the vans to shipping containers. Inside each cage, he could make out the shapes of dogs, German Shepherds, Belgian Malinois, and other breeds favored by military and law enforcement. Each animal sat with unnatural stillness, their training evident even in confinement. A sleek black SUV arrived, and Deputy Commissioner Wilson stepped out, accompanied by Andrew Carter. They spoke briefly with the loading crew before moving toward the ship's office. Their confidence was absolute. They had no idea their operation was about to unravel. Patrick's phone vibrated with a message from Sarah, FBI team in position. They have satellite confirmation of similar operations in 3 other ports. Authorization for simultaneous raids approved. Waiting for your signal. Max suddenly tensed, his attention fixed on movement near the containers. Through the shadows, Patrick recognized James Garner approaching Wilson and Carter, gesturing frantically. Something had spooked him. Emily's voice came through their secure channel. They found the empty safe. They know. Wilson's reaction was immediate. He began barking orders, and the loading operation accelerated. They were trying to salvage what they could before everything fell apart. But it was too late. Patrick sent the signal, and the port erupted into action. FBI vehicles emerged from hidden positions, their lights painting the night in red and blue. The security guards, faced with federal agents, immediately stood down. Wilson and Carter attempted to reach their vehicle but found their path blocked. In the chaos, Garner tried to slip away toward a side gate. Max, without waiting for a command, took off after him. Patrick followed, trusting his partner's instincts one final time. They caught up to Garner near the same warehouse where Max had disappeared 3 years ago. It was supposed to be simple, Garner blurted out, his facade cracking. Find trained dogs, make them disappear, ship them overseas. The money was too good to question. But your dog, he never broke. 3 years, and he never forgot his real purpose. The evidence was overwhelming. Emily's documentation, Sarah's financial traces, Mike's research, and the FBI surveillance revealed the full scope of the operation. Trained police and military dogs had been stolen, reconditioned, and sold to private military contractors overseas. The New Hope Foundation had been their pipeline, and corrupt officials like Wilson had provided protection. In the following weeks, as federal investigators unraveled the conspiracy, more details emerged. Dozens of missing dogs were tracked down and rescued. Many, like Max, had resisted their new handlers, their loyalty to their original training proving unshakable. Patrick stood in his backyard, watching Max play with one of the rescued dogs, a young Belgian Malinois who would soon be reunited with her original handler. The scars of the past 3 years would never fully fade, but they had turned those wounds into justice. Sarah had been promoted to lead a new task force investigating similar operations nationwide. Emily, recognized for her courage in documenting the conspiracy, had accepted a position with an international animal welfare organization. And Patrick, he had his partner back, along with a newfound purpose. Max approached, dropping his favorite ball at Patrick's feet. In his eyes, Patrick saw the same unwavering trust that had guided them through their darkest hours. Some bonds, they had proven, were truly unbreakable. The END Dear viewers, we hope this story of loyalty, courage, and justice has touched your hearts. Max and Patrick's journey reminds us that true partnerships can overcome any obstacle. For more compelling stories that explore the depths of human-animal bonds and the triumph of justice over corruption, please subscribe to our channel and click the like button. Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what this story meant to you. Don't forget to turn on notifications to catch our next adventure. Until then, remember, loyalty, like Max's, knows no bounds.